Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome MTSU graduate and chair of the MTSU Board of Trustees, Steve Smith.
Woo, woo, woo. I want to thank everyone for giving their time and money and investing in the Daniels Center. We've got a full program, and I'm excited about getting with it, so fasten your seatbelt. James Teachner is singing our national anthem. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran, MTSU professor, singer, award-winning songwriter. James?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Next, we have a treat. Businessman, family man, former head of department, Economic Development, Tennessee, United States Ambassador to Japan, member of the Armed Services Committee, United States Senator Bill Hagerty will offer our praise for our meal.
Thanks, Steve. Steve, thank you. Before I offer the prayer, I think I might just take 30 seconds and let you know I spent the better part of last week, the first part of this week as well, over in Northeast Tennessee. We've got fellow Tennesseans that are hurting greatly, and I hope you'll just continue to keep them in your hearts and your prayers as well. A lot to do there. Steve, thank you for inviting me to do this. It's a great honor today. If we'd all bow our heads, please. Heavenly Father, we thank you this morning for these veterans present today and for their service to this great country. Thank you for the leadership of Middle Tennessee State University and those whose vision is leading us to the creation of a Veterans Center to support, honor, and serve those who have been willing to lay their lives down for the sake of their fellow citizens. Our veterans answered a calling that's crucial for our nation's people, our freedom, and for our national security. We want to honor them this morning and thank them for who they are as people, as patriots, as protectors. This morning, we remember the scriptures where John teaches us that there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for another. Lord, thank you for these veterans and for the community leaders here that support them. Their patriotism and leadership have proven essential for the success of our nation. And God, please bless those present here today who seek to honor and support these veterans. We ask all these things in the name of the Lamb of God, who laid down his life for us and proved himself to be our ultimate protector. Amen.
Thank you, sir. First, I need to recognize a couple of people. Jane Lynch Crane, my right-hand man, she did all this work. Last night at midnight, she and Lori were in here doing it. These things don't just happen, and she's done all the work and has for Bill Frist and I for the last 30 years. She was right out of high school. First, I think it's appropriate that we ask all our veterans to stand so that we can recognize and applaud you. So if you would please shed your humility and stand. Yeah. Thank you. I would encourage you to go ahead and start on your meal. We had a successful event because so many have given graciously of their time and treasure. So it's my honor to recognize, and when you do that, you're always treading on thin ice. First, I'd like to recognize and ask him to stand, Sidney McPhee, our president of our school. Sidney McPhee's dream and force is the reason we have a Daniels Center. He was smart enough to hire Huber and encourage and help and get out of his way when necessary. But Dr. McPhee, without you, we wouldn't be here, and I want to applaud and thank you. Then we've got a great list of folks to recognize. One, General Jim Mattis. Don't stand. If you'd like, just throw your hands up. Lieutenant General Keith Huber, his wife Shelley and Alexis. And without them, Keith Huber wouldn't be much. Lieutenant General Dennis Cavan, General Bill Hickman, United States Senator Bill Haggerty, former Majority Leader MD, and his wife Tracy are here. Thanks for getting up early and being here. Former Congressman Diane Black, I understand from General Cavan that her mother had an accident last night and she's not going to be with us, but she's with us in treasure and in thoughts. Tennessee State Majority Leader Jack Johnson, TVA Board Chair Joe Rich and his wife Lana. Thank you, Joe. We wouldn't be here without TVA as well because they're one of our underwriting sponsors and immediately answered yes. I think we got a check before we got a lot of trouble too, didn't we? CoreCivic President and CEO Damon Henniger. Same way, Damon is underwriter of this event and CoreCivic. This event wouldn't be a huge success without Damon's enthusiastic help. Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall, Williamson County Mayor Rogers Anderson, Tommy Baker, Tennessee Veteran Services, Executive Director Daniel Decker, Tennessee Valley Health System. So I'll make a special note, and since I've got the floor, to recognize something that I'm proud of. This is for the Daniels Center and MTSU, but leadership has to give. And Lieutenant General Keith Huber gave money to be here tonight. Every seat here is paid for. There are no freebies. So Huber gave money. Provost Dr. Mark Burns. Sidney McPhee wrote a check. Athletic Director Chris Massaro. The winningest coach in MTSU history, Rick Insel. His right-hand man and great coach, Matt Insel. Basketball coach, Nick McDivitt. Baseball coach, Jerry Myers. Football coach, Derek Mason. Sidney and I hope he's preparing to win a game tonight. And Vice President Joe Bales. The reason I point them out is they're here, but they paid to be here just like every seat in this house. You either paid for it or somebody did. Supporting businesses, I'd like to recognize Ward Baker and the Baker Group. It took him about 3 heartbeats to say, yes, I'm in. And he's a volunteer and always out front. And Ward, thank you. It's a privilege to get a good answer. Being a willing giver, it's in the Bible, but being in the willing giver makes a profession like I have good. Nashville Airport, International Airport, Colonel Doug Crewlin, Colonel John Cooper wholeheartedly jumped in, and thank you. Jimmy had something to do with that, and we thank Jimmy, and he can't be here today, but we appreciate that. Colin and Brenda Reed in Opry Entertainment. We sprung that on Monday or Tuesday, and they said yes. And Hiring and Smith Contractors and Matt Smith, our COO. Presenting sponsor, we just recognized, but will again, Damon Henniger, Bob Dennis, board member. Beth Harwell is here. She's a member of the TVA board and an important part of Tennessee, being the former Speaker of the House. Joe Rich and Lana, thank you. And now we're going to have a special word from our #1 sponsors. So let the good times roll.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Damon Heiniger. I'm President and CEO of CoreCivic. We are so honored to be a part of today's event for the Daniels Veterans and Military Family Center there at MTSU. We have a deep desire to support veterans as an organization. It really goes back to the beginning of the company's founding. Tom Beasley, West Point grad, served in the Army as a Vietnam veteran. Really since day one when he founded the company, we made a concerted effort then and now to have veterans come work in our organization. People that have worked in the military, that have worn the uniform, that have served our country relative to their abilities, their ability to communicate, their leadership capabilities, so transferable to working in our organization and in our profession. So we've had great success over the years to recruit and retain people that not only just work on the front lines within our facilities, but also have advanced into leadership as wardens and even to our FSC here in Brentwood, Tennessee. And I should say not just employees, but also people that are in our facilities. We've got people that are in prison, that were in the military. They still have a love for country and still obviously have that desire to have the camaraderie that comes from military service. So we've done a lot of work on programs to help support them and make that connection with others that are incarcerated that are former militaries. Thank you again to the center. Thank you to MTSU, and thank you for letting us to be a small part of today's program.
I enlisted when I was 17 years old. I was still in high school. It derived from a necessity to go to school, and the military was my way of making that happen.
At 17, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I thought I could join the Navy, see the world, and maybe find out what my passion really was.
So I joined the United States Navy back in 2004, and based on my aptitude testing, submarine service was one of my options.
In my case, I was underage. I was only 17, and I had to have my parents' written consent.
So I spent 3 years on board a nuclear fast attack submarine as a yeoman in the Pacific. When you get to a submarine, first thing you do is get a stack of qual cards where they say, get hot, get qualified on this boat so you can become a useful body. Everything you need to know to make you a useful body on board so you can be relied upon in an emergency.
I served 4 years in the United States Navy, where I trained to be an aviation electronics technician. I was responsible for all the communications equipment on the P-3 aircraft. Even today, I look back on pictures of my crewmates and think to myself, being on that team was the best part about being in the Navy.
I served a total of 23 years, combined Army, active Army, Army Reserve, and then ultimately Navy Reserve. I came from a not-so-great part outside of Detroit, Michigan. The last thing I thought I would be doing is shaking the President of the United States' hand.
My official title in the Navy was CTI. They decrypt coded messages. I was the first woman ever to be awarded the Joint Service Commendation Medal by the Secretary of Defense and Joint Chiefs of Staff, because when I was working for the National Security Agency, I discovered the key that allowed the agency to computerize cryptanalysis.
Even though I'm no longer in the U.S. Navy, my mission of service continues by serving the people of the Tennessee Valley here at TVA.
For me, it really means a lot to be working for an organization that clearly cares about its neighbors, the people of the Tennessee Valley.
I think there's a huge sense of pride within the organization, within the TVA staff. There's a sense of pride for not only what we do in the communities, but what we do for each other as well.
I like TVA's mission of serving the people. As in the military, where I was also serving the people, it's carried over. I'm very proud to be part of TVA.
The reason you have a right-hand man is when they remind you I left out a page. Our host committee, MTSU trustee J.B. Baker, Tom Beasley, West Point Vietnam combat veteran, Silver Star winner. This wouldn't have happened without Tom. MTSU trustee Pete DeLay, John Floyd in Old South Homes, Naval Academy graduate and former Navy pilot David Frazier in Hardaway Construction, Bill and Trace Frist, Jimmy Granberry in TWRA, L.A. Green, Marine fighter pilot Bill Hawkins, Marine veteran Johnny Lee, United States Army veteran Tom Patton, Silicon Ranch Corporation, Marine Vietnam combat veteran Don Witherspoon, and his wife, Hannah. The last three are particularly interesting to me because they're my suite mates at baseball games. Don Witherspoon, the next one is Vietnam combat veteran, combat infantryman badge, Andy Womack. Vietnam combat veteran, Wayne Gross. They're all table hosts and gave $10,000. So next is my privilege to introduce Lieutenant General Keith Huber. Army Lieutenant General, retired. Keith Huber was born to a military family. His granddaddy served in World War I, his father in the big one. He graduated from West Point in 1975, served 38 years active duty as an infantryman and the longest serving Green Beret in American history. For 14 of his 38 years, he served as the rank of a general officer. His overseas service includes tours in Panama, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Haiti, Honduras, Kosovo, Afghanistan. Lieutenant General Huber is Special Forces and Ranger qualified. He's a combat infantryman, Special Operations combat diver, Master Parachutist, Air Assault Joint Chiefs of Staff badges, and a badass. He currently serves as Senior Advisor for the Veterans Leadership Initiatives and the Distinguished Visiting Professor at MTSU. General Huber created the Charlie and Hazel Daniels Veterans and Military Family Center at school, one of the largest and most comprehensive veterans center in the nation, accompanied by his wife and daughter, Alexis. General Huber.
I think the only thing honorable to do right now is immediately die and use that as my obituary. So if you ever get to the point in your life where you're not embarrassed by people praising you, my recommendation would be you need to get a grip on your ego. Thank you for being here. I don't care about the technology. I'm absolutely convinced that we demonstrate to each other what is important by our physical presence. And I know everybody in this room has got more things to do today than the time would allow, but I guarantee you the privilege to hear the people that we're about to witness this morning is a historical event. Thank you for your presence, for your continued support of our veterans and our heroes, those precious family members, through your support of the Charlie and Hazel Daniels Veterans and Military Family Center. Many of you here have reached out to me personally, to the center, to request assistance for yourself, for your family, for your employees who are veterans, and I thank you for that. The leadership of MTSU President McPhee has already been heralded, but every day I'm thankful for the unparalleled support of Middle Tennessee State University, which allowed the creation of the Charlie and Hazel Daniels Veterans and Military Families Center, which is located on the campus of Middle Tennessee State University, but that allows us to serve veterans and their family members worldwide, every day, without any requirement that you have an affiliation, that you're a student, that you're staff or faculty, that you're alumni. No restriction, no requirement. If you're a veteran or a family member and you need help, you have a question, I'm your action officer. Reach out, grab me by the throat, shake me like a rag doll, and I am here to serve you and your families, and I'm appreciative of that sense of purpose. Right now, I'd like to introduce to you Army veteran Jay Strabino. 6 years in the infantry, 2 combat tours in Iraq. During his second combat tour in Iraq, deployed near the Triangle of Death on the 1st of February 2006, got into a gunfight, was shot 13 times, was presented the Purple Heart and awarded the Silver Star. Army Sergeant Jay Strabino.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Please. Thank you. General Huber, thank you so much for that introduction. Senator Hagerty, thank you for leading us off. General Mattis, Leader Frist, thank you for being here. This is an honor of a lifetime to briefly share the stage with peak caliber Americans right now. Yes, the General mentioned I was shot 13 times on my last combat deployment in February 2006. I was able to retire at the ripe age of 23 at 2008. And then I was a little bitter. I believe that I had much more to give with service. My time was cut short. But I always wanted to join the military, but I'm the son of first-generation college graduates, my mother and my father. College was always there, had to be there. When I was a senior in high school, the towers came down. And I sat my parents down and I said, service has to come first. And they said, that's fine, but college isn't a question. And so the only thing I knew to do when I retired was to go to college. And I struggled to be a civilian, especially in my first few years out of the military. And that was a disservice that I did to myself by ignoring my military past, being bitter with my hasty exit. And in that struggle to be a civilian, I did not learn till years later that that was a mistake, because I will never be a civilian. I am always going to be a veteran. Years down the line, after I had finished my time at MTSU, but did not graduate, I was eager to get back into the workforce. I got in touch with General Huber, went to MTSU, and he brought me along the path and showed me all that the Daniels Center has to offer. I sat down with members of their team, finished everything that was needed, and I walked the very next semester. Thank you, President McPhee. And I saw then that there is no one that cares more for the veteran or their family members than this team. Ticket prices were mentioned, Steve. 6 years ago, I was driving a car that was less than the price of one of these tickets. And that fact is not lost on me at all. So I appreciate every single one of you for being here to support this organization, to continue what they do every single day, because there is no other organization in America that does what they do for Americans, service members, and their family members. But more importantly, and General Huber alluded to this, is your presence here. We can all make more money, but our one finite resource in this world is time. You cannot make more time. You will not get this time back. And so all of you being here today shows me your care of giving your one finite resource to this organization. Because I will wager the current price of my car now that you will not find a greater organization or people that care more for the American veteran and their family members than General Huber, Dr. Miller, and their entire team at the Daniels Center. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here and share that with you.
If that doesn't move you, you're excused. We have a fantastic event coming up with Leader Bill Frist and General Mattis. It's my pleasure to introduce Bill Frist, my best pal. Frist's accomplishments are too numerous to mention. Princeton, Harvard, Stanford. Frist has transplanted over 100 hearts. He created the Vanderbilt Heart Transplant Center that currently does more heart transplants, heart and lung transplants, I was corrected by my wife this morning, than any center in the United States. Elected to the United States Senate in 1994, soon became Majority Leader. Got to that post faster than any other man in American history. His influence was the catalyst for PEPFAR. That was the greatest humanitarian effort in the history of the world, saving over 20 million lives in Africa and around the world. Keeping his promise to only serve 2 terms, Senator Frist launched a venture capital private equity concern, and today Frist Cressy Ventures ranks in the top 4% of the 1,400 funds that are listed. Many people have one great effort. I'm not aware of anyone in the world that has led the world in 3 great efforts. Bill Frist has saved hundreds of people with his hands, but millions of people with his heart. Bill Frist, please come forward.
General Jim Mattis, who once again attempted to influence me by giving me guidance unsolicited on how long I should introduce him. To those who do not know Jim Mattis, to them he's a myth, a warrior monk, a legend, a source of bold, energetic, profound quotes. I keep other people awake at night. Be polite, be professional, and have a plan to kill everyone you meet. No greater friend, no worse enemy. To those of us who know him, who have had the privilege to serve with him and serve for him, he has earned our unconditional respect and trust. He is the leader we want to be. He is the warrior that we willingly follow through the flame and to our death if called upon to defend our democracy, safeguard our liberties, and protect our families. To me, he's much more than that. We first met in 1999 as one-star generals together in a capstone course. We became close friends. I then had the privilege later on to serve for him twice. As a three-star deputy commanding general for a year and a half with Joint Forces Command, and then for 2 years during my tour in Afghanistan. He is the premier servant leader to me. He is the ultimate warrior. He is the man in my notebook that when I die, my wife is instructed to call. I am humbled to be his true friend. Ladies and gentlemen, the 26th Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis.
My mother must have helped you write that one. Keith, I'll write my mother and thank her for helping you write that introduction.
General, it's pretty amazing looking out here at almost 400 people who have come to really hear you, but as you and I know, doing lots of these sorts of things, they are coming for America. The American flags that are sitting at every table that we have here today. And the General and I are the only two people who have the perspective. Steve and General Hooper did as well, but to be able to look out and say sort of thank you for being here today. General, what about it? You're in Nashville, Tennessee, and General Hooper called and Steve called and I called, and the answer was yes, 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 right up front. Welcome to Middle Tennessee State University and Nashville, Tennessee.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I've known the senator a long time, a great leader, but Tennessee also is a special state. And I think it's all the way back to the War of 1812 when you got known as the volunteer state, because when we needed 2,000, you sent 12,000 volunteers out of your little state. Didn't have so many people in those days. So it's an honor to be here. But not only are you an example of volunteering and service to our country for the rest of the country to look at, and you make it known with your state motto, but you're also an example, a role model for how you take care of veterans and help them make the next step of their lives a positive one. So thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for being here. General, I have not scripted anything today, and so it really will be a conversation and with all of you. And if people do have questions, we may get to questions in the audience as well. And literally, we've not talked about what we're going to be talking about today. So let me start. I want to do a tour around the world with you, selfishly, because it's rare. It's not just rare, but you never have the opportunity to have that conversation in a living room with somebody such as General Mattis. So I want to get to that. But there are interesting things about your past that just would love for you to comment upon. And you and I have talked about it. And one of the things that you've always done is had reading lists. And with your fellow soldiers, you've always stressed the importance of culture, of understanding people as you've traveled around the world and been with soldiers around the world. I understand that you stress to them the importance of understanding through humanity, through reading the people around them. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, in our line of work, of course, there's absolutely critical. That wasn't me, but it was critical that we learn from our past. If you don't learn from history, as you're required to do in the U.S. military, it's like you went down to the florist shop and bought some cut flowers, stuck them in your backyard, and expected them to grow. They have no roots. They're not going to grow. And so we have to grow as leaders, and the reading is absolutely essential to that, because that's where you find where other men and women, successfully or unsuccessfully, dealt with a similar problem in the past. And it doesn't give you all the answers, I think, Senator. What it gives you are what questions should you be asking as you take decisions that are going to put young men, young women's lives on the line. So it's not just an intellectual responsibility, a strategic responsibility, it's a moral responsibility. As a leader, you're going to be at the top of your game. And you have to adapt to whether it's this country or that culture. You have to adapt in your own country to the demands of its time. And here I can only say that to all the elected representatives here at a time when our country's going through tough times or set the conditions in past service, but to those like Senator Hagerty who are continuing to serve at a time when you don't get a lot of thanks for it, frankly. Just history, if you read it, you know we're going to get through this time, and we're going to get through thanks to people who've done their homework and are willing to lead. And so it's critical, and I think that the more we can get young people into colleges and teach them how precious this country is through the education they get there, I think the stronger we're going to be.
General, as we were walking in, and I said, you know, people are going to be interested in your past and decisions being made and how you got to where you did. And General said, no, you know, this is really about them. Let's give them information that isn't sort of reflected on by us. And then I said, no, people are interested in your past. So we won't go all the way back to 1950 coming back, but why the military? Was it a epiphany? Did you fall into it? Was it something that happened when you were young? Just give us a little taste of sort of how you got in the beginning. The origin story, but I know you don't want to go back to the origin story. Take it from there.
Right, when the earth cooled, I was...
a long, long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. But
once upon a time.
I was having a whale of a good time my first year in college. So good a time, I lost my 2S draft deferment in 1969. I won't go into all the details. I could say that I was being messed with. Fact is, I deserved to lose my draft deferment. And as Keith Huber told me one time, you were the dumbest draft dodger I ever met. To get out of being drafted into the Army, you joined the Marine Infantry, okay? So I wasn't too bright, but I really had no plans. I had my life planned as a young guy. I was going to go to college. I was going to come out. I was going to teach physics and history and coach football. Had my whole life planned at age 18, the same year that life changed, and I was on my way into the Marine Corps. So it was an accidental or stumbling into it, to put it in your words, Senator. But after I was in a couple years, it was not an epiphany. It was just I fell in love with the sailors and Marines of the Fleet Marine Force. I'd like to give you some deeper measure. It was the human beings, these unselfish, often very rambunctious, I might add, young lads. I was in the infantry, so it was all male. And just being around them was just such a pleasure. I learned to hate minefields at age 21. I don't like them to this day. I still hate them. But boy, I love being around the sailors and Marines who would crawl into a minefield probing, looking for something they didn't want to find, knowing if they didn't catch it, either them or their buddies were going to be dead. I just fell in love with the troops.
One of the great things about walking into a room like this, you're not going to see sort of a more patriotic, even the organization of these 2 hours. And it's because it comes from both the Daniels organization, General Hoover, the MTSU, and the role of the patriotism and the freedoms and the opportunity. How early on did that strike you? I mean, clearly it's a sort of a guiding force of your life. But is that something that comes naturally, or does it come from the experience and the witnessing of people around you? Where does the patriotism in sort of the classic sense, or almost a Greek sense that you have today and obviously manifested throughout your life?
Well, I was raised, Senator, by the greatest generation. And to them, when the president calls, Republican or Democrat, makes no difference, it's your duty. You have a responsibility to serve this country. And looking back over the years, it was such a privilege to do so. But the patriotism was in the quiet example of that greatest generation, raised in a depression, goes off to fight a war that probably could have been avoided had we taken the right steps in the 1930s. There was no cynicism, there was no victimhood. They dealt with life. As a poet once put it, they manned themselves to deal with the terrors of life. And those people growing up amongst them, they were my teachers, my coaches, my neighbors. There was an expectation, probably one of the most powerful things we can give young people, an expectation for how to conduct your life. So I think it was ingrained in us almost like our DNA, Senator. It was just there.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're going to walk around the world, but these things keep coming to me. What gives you passion? What is I know there's not one thing, but either when it comes to your mind or you're working, it could be recently as secretary, or it could be, when you were coming through the military and into your ways of service. Is there any sort of one thing that's a central organizing passion inside? And I ask that because we all kind of search for our passion, and whatever we align around that, we know we're going to do better with it. Was there any sort of, I'm stalling a little bit because I want you to really think about it, but is there any one kind of passion directing little voice inside?
In my 1st Infantry Battalion, the executive officer and the Marine Corps, it's not like Burger King. You don't get to do it your way, Mm-hmm. That's why they call them orders, not likes. They're not instant what you like to do. It's an order. And we were all ordered on the Marine Corps birthday to read the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And it started a love affair, frankly. I read it almost every year on the Marine Corps birthday. I remind myself what it is we're defending. And that passion, as you realize what an experiment this is, what a tenuous experiment it is, in some ways fragile and yet enduring generation after generation, it has kept me always almost in a sense of awe. And then when I deal with foreign countries, and they realize the level of passion that our troops have to defend this great big experiment. That's what George Washington first called it, was an experiment. And you heard this morning as our national anthem was so beautifully sung, I couldn't sing or dance, they put me in the infantry. Does that Star-Spangled Banner still wave? And Francis Scott Key was writing about more than just the flag. Does the country still stand as he watches the most powerful fleet in the world pound Fort McHenry? And it's a sense that we have to recognize our responsibility to the next generation. We need to have a passion for this, to look out for these young people and say, we're going to give you a country in as good a shape or better than we received it. And right now I question if people with my color hair are doing that for the young people here. I mean, I've never been one to patronize American people. And I'm just sharing with you a concern I have, the passion that the Marine Corps kind of brought out in me. And now I'm a little more worried that we're not doing what is our generation's responsibility, and certainly what the greatest generation gave us. I often consider my generation the luckiest generation because we were brought up by them. So that passion brings with it a caution right now as we watch our enemies getting stronger around the world.
Let's do come back to that, because I think this responsibility, and everybody, by being here this morning and sharing your resources, obviously feels that commitment of passing on,
yes,
of perpetuation, of a sense of responsibility into action, and that translation coming in. Let's travel around the world. It's a conversation that, again, you'll leave with today that you would have never had if you hadn't been here. And I say that and I have no idea what we're going to be talking about. But let's start wherever you'd like, but let's touch on Afghanistan and China and North Korea and the Middle East. And go ahead and pace it how you think sort of appropriate coming in. But let's just take a trip around the world. And I will just preface that in that, as everybody knows, I'm out of the political world, the policy world I care very much about, but still talk to people like Senator Hagerty and others. And clearly, in the last 50 years, I am told that we are at a more potentially dangerous, precipitously dangerous time in the last 50 years. It could be 40, it could be 60 years. Whether or not that's true, it kind of puts in perspective where we are today and the importance of having these conversations and the importance of this center, these American flags, what they represent. So the tour begins.
Well, if I was meeting 2 years ago in this room, I'd say our number one challenge is China. And then we've got to make certain that at the same time the terrorists are kept at arm's length so they never pull off what they did on 9/11 again. And talk a bit about some internal challenges about the polarization and the national debt. But looking at the external threat today, I would say it's somewhat different. I would characterize it differently. And that is, it's an axis of autocrats. It's China and Russia and North Korea and Iran. And these countries are united. We don't want to exaggerate how much they work together, but we cannot dismiss it either. Number one, they all believe that the West in general, and by the West I mean the democracies, and the United States in particular, and they point to January 6th and other events, that we're on irretrievable decline, that we're going under. Now's the time to get brave. Now's the time to work against the American-led international order that prizes peace, prosperity for all, the rule of law, this sort of thing. Specifically, when you look at, let me give you an example of how this manifests. On January 2nd of this year, in Ukraine, where the Ukrainians are fighting the war NATO never wanted to fight against an aggressive Russia, the Russians launched a major attack against the energy infrastructure. It's middle of winter in Ukraine, it's cold there, and their goal is to knock out all the energy in the country. And on that day, they launched hundreds of missiles and drones. The missiles were Russian and North Korean manufacture. They were carrying Chinese technology. 170 Iranian drones were part of the disruptive attack that prefaced the major attack, also with Chinese technology. Now, you cannot dismiss something like that and say that's just accidental or something like that. That is malice and forethought working together to crush the Ukrainian people. And so what you're going to see is a big fight in the information space, they call it now, basically over TV, newspapers, however you get your news on your cell phones and this sort of thing, to try to convince us to hate one another in America, to distrust one another in America, to have no respect for one another, to absolutely not love each other. And it comes through to a polarized country in ways that are very hurtful, because we cannot have a sustainable foreign policy leading our allies in terms of trying to deter this unless we have some degree of unity here at home on fundamentals. Think of the Cold War, when Republican and Democrat presidents go in and out of office, but the strategy remains the same: contain the Soviet Union until their internal rot takes them down, and hopefully do it without a war. There's three answers to how we deal with a world like we're confronting now, and that we need to turn over to our kids in somewhat of a peaceful shape. And those three words are allies, allies, allies. Allies at home, one another, allies overseas. I had the privilege of fighting for all of you many times. Not once did I fight in an all-American formation. My last job, I commanded 200,000 U.S. troops. I also had over 50,000 Allied troops entrusted to us who were there for one reason: because America had been attacked. And you stop and think of that. On 9/11, when innocent citizens of 91 countries were murdered on our soil, we ended up having dozens of countries fighting alongside us and losing thousands of their boys killed and wounded too. And they were there for one reason: we were attacked. The day after 9/11 in NATO, they all met, and another country stood up and said, an attack on one is an attack on all. And 100% of NATO voted, we're going to war. First time NATO ever went to war was for America.
Talk to us about China. China comes to the head economically, socially, geographically. We got Taiwan. It's on the sort of tip of mind for just about everybody. Place that into the global perspective today.
Well, that's an example where I think we have pretty much bipartisan support on Capitol Hill, which has gone above and beyond in many ways of how to deal with the Chinese. And by the way, added every year for the last 4 years, billions of dollars to the military budget in order to make us capable of deterring the Chinese from doing exactly that, go after Taiwan. First of all, the Chinese boss, and I've met with President Xi, he's like an emperor. He considers all other countries, well, you're a tribute state. You pay tribute to the great man. Why else would he go after Lithuania or the Czech Republic or Australia? Simply because they disagree on something politically, or they have an economic concern. And he's gone after each one of those countries, demonstrating either you agree with us or we're going to hurt you. That's their idea of how to deal with the world. If you want to see foreign policy governed with Chinese characteristics, to put it in President Xi's words, just take a look at NATO's declaration. All these democracies, by the way, NATO, European NATO, with also the Japanese, Republic of Korea, Australia, and New Zealand presidents or prime ministers attending. Right now, China is what NATO describes as the decisive enabler to Russia's war in Ukraine. In other words, Russia could not conduct that war without Chinese help. So a point to remember here as we look at China is a victory for any one of these four nations, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, is a victory for all. If you want to stop an invasion of Taiwan, what you want to do is make certain that Putin is not successful in Ukraine. That's much stronger than any memo we could send the Chinese saying, don't do this. At the same time, I don't know that they're going to move on Taiwan soon. Their economy, as all of you business people know, is in a very shaky mode right now. Their demographic situation is a disaster, and it's going to get worse. In an uncertain world, where you're not sure, the world's just awash in change, technological, geopolitical, climate, whatever. The most certain thing in an uncertain world is demography. There's not a darn thing that President Xi can do to reverse his declining workforce, his declining number of people to draw for the military or to support the military. So right now, I don't think he would take the economic perturbations of an invasion of Taiwan, because that's almost certainly going to dump the Chinese Communist Party into a very, very weakened state in terms of its political control. So we've got some time. Furthermore, for any of you naval people in here, Navy veterans, if you've sailed through the Formosa Straits, the Taiwan Straits, that is 110 miles of bad water. The current that comes down is squeezed between that big island of Formosa and China. Why is that important? Why am I bringing that up at a breakfast here in Nashville? The reason is that an amphibious operation is the most perilous type of operation. You either land and win or you die. There's no adjusting your front lines or falling back or moving left or right. The beaches are terrible on Taiwan, and if the Taiwan people simply stay united and create what I would call a porcupine defense, you know, a porcupine up in my Pacific Northwest woods, he crawls around the woods where there's grizzly bears. And a grizzly bear looks at that porcupine and he says, you know, I could take him, but it's just not worth the pain. Right now, I think we got to make sure there's a porcupine there in Taiwan to buy time until, again, China's internal situation adjusts and hopefully they become a more responsible member of the international community. Right now, that's not where they're at. Right now, they see you on the decline and them taking over. And if you want to see what it looks like, again, just look at Russia versus Crimea.
We probably don't need to go too far into politics for politics' sake, but how well does the United States, from your perspective, do in terms of consistency of policy, like the One China policy or the tied to China mainland Taiwan policy? Because we're all constantly shifting, not that we are, and that's really my question. You've been on the sort of from the Secretary of Defense standpoint, but also from a military standpoint, that relationship between the policy and the military as an observer, because you're interrelated. How good are we at the consistency and how important is it?
Well, there is a comment by a former British Prime Minister that says democracy is the worst form of government except for all the rest we've tried. And one of the reasons for that is it's difficult to maintain a consistency, which is why the need for a unified on basic principles, why that unification is so important, especially to our allies who are watching America very closely right now. They're very nervous. They don't know where we're at. And they really need to know where America stands on certain things, which means we need to know where we stand and come to some degree of unity on it. So with allies right now being concerned with us, you have to fall back a little bit and say why. And you all know where we've been in our internal politics. I don't need to give you all any lessons on this. But at the same time, the reverberations of that as it goes through the international community can leave our adversaries saying, maybe now's the time. The Americans aren't united enough. We can move against them. Or other nations say, maybe we can't count on the Americans. And again, I never fought once without people fighting alongside us, our allies fighting alongside us. And we have to understand that is our unique strength. Just think of China that has one treaty ally, North Korea. Now, can you imagine if our discussion this morning was whether or not Cuba was our ally? I mean, you'd look at me like I was crazy. Well, that's the situation they face. So if we recognize how important allies are, all we're doing is recognizing what's called an altruism in history. And there aren't very many things that are always true in history. But here's one. Nations with allies thrive, nations without allies wither. And if you remember that and hold true to that, you'll find ways to make common cause with a lot more people. That's what the greatest generation did coming home from World War II. They looked around at the world, said, that is a crummy world. Our depression we grew up under, believe it or not, 20% of the boys drafted in World War II had to be fattened up because they were too malnourished to go directly into military training. The military, think of that. That's America. That's the America that defeated fascism. And what did they do after World War II? They said, we tried retreating from the world after World War I, saying, well, if we ignore the world, it'll ignore us. That cost us hundreds of thousands dead. Matter of fact, Winston Churchill was asked by a young aspiring reporter as World War II is breaking out, what are we going to call this war? After all, World War I at that time was called the Great War. They didn't have a name for World War II. He immediately responded, the avoidable war. Think of that, 70 million dead, and a learned man said it could have been avoided if we had done in the 1930s what we should have done and banded together as democracies and say no further, stop right there. We didn't do it, and we paid with World War II. So I think the most important thing now is to learn from history, make certain we're holding our allies close, because what they did when they came home. You got time for a short story?
I'd love it. I'd love it.
I love the senator because he never had big guy-itis when I met him. You know, you meet a senator, you're a young general, you think, golly, you know, what am I going to say to this guy? He knows everything, does everything. Immediately put me at ease, so I just took advantage of it.
Let's go do it. Take us to the story.
So the boys come home from World War II, and gals come out of the factories, and they say it's a crummy world, like it or not, we're part of it. No more denying reality. No more living in a dream world. And the Australian ambassador is talking to me in his backyard one day. I'm a Supreme Allied Commander for NATO, and they're going to send more troops in to help us in Afghanistan. And he said, you know, you Americans made the single greatest pledge in world history, self-sacrificial pledge, ever, after World War II. And I'm looking at him thinking, I'd better know as much about American history as this Australian dude. And I said, you mean setting up the United Nations? He said, no. He said, you got the headquarters of it. They bring all their money here. He said, you were just trying to settle some problems so they wouldn't become wars, never designed to settle all the problems. I said, okay, how about Bretton Woods? Bretton Woods 1 and 2. You and I know it as the IMF, the World Bank. If somebody's losing all hope for creating wealth, business people can't get it going, you've got a lender of last resort. He said, He said, you got the world's reserve currency. That's a big benefit for you. So I said, I know what it was, the Marshall Plan. 3 years after what the Nazis had done in Europe, after what the Japanese had done to our prisoners of war, and we're helping our enemies get back on their feet. Basically, we crushed fascism and welcomed the German, Japanese, Italian people back into the community of nations. He said, no. That just shows how generous and unique a victor the Americans are. I said, well, what was it? He said, NATO. He said, after World War II, you could have looked at Europe and said, that's twice in 30 years you dragged us into your stupid wars. And we're through with you. You're on your own with the Soviet Union. He said, instead, you recalled to active duty, told General Eisenhower, the most trusted general in the world, come back in, go stand up NATO, and we're going to pledge 100 million dead Americans in a nuclear war to protect democracy in Europe. Isn't it interesting, one, that it took a foreigner to teach me that, and two, what's the first time again NATO goes to war? When America's attacked. That's the wisdom of the pragmatic greatest generation, somewhat lost today as we're not aware of just how key our allies are. And we can make allies out of a lot of people. Time for another sea story.
Let's do it.
I'm in Hanoi, and I'm there as the Secretary of Defense, and I brought about 35, 40 officers, and they brought about 35, 40 to this dinner one night. And my counterpart there, the Minister of Defense of Vietnam, he said, by the way, Minister Shoigu of Russia was here yesterday. I gave him a lunch. And he's throwing a dinner. Ladies and gentlemen, it makes Vegas look like a cheap date, okay? It's like Nashville last night. It's really first class. And we're sitting there and all of our officers having a good time, and I'm sitting like this close to him, and we're watching all of our young officers toasting each other's countries and stuff. We got the translator sitting where these bottles of water are. And I tell him, look, you're a commie, I'm not, I'm never going to agree with you. That's all there is to it. But it's in America's best interest that Vietnamese make decisions about Vietnam, not China. What can I do to help you? And so he's pondering it, sitting there, and just like two old grandpas watching our young officers enjoying life. And we're taught to look at each other when the translator's talking, okay? You don't look at the translator. And so I'm sitting there, and he looks at me, and he said, basically through the translator, can you have a U.S. Navy ship sometime in the next year pull into a Vietnamese port and just make a port call, just send a message like that? And I'm looking at him, Senator, just like I'm looking at you, and I tell the translator, ask him how he would like to have a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier and 5 escorting destroyers in Cam Ranh Bay in 60 days. I'm looking at him. And the translator doesn't say anything. I look at him, his eyes are about this big. I said, tell him. And he tells him. Immediately, he jerks his head over, looks at the translator, looks back at me, and obviously asked the translator to repeat it. Then he reached over and took my hand and said, thank you, thank you. My point is, America is such a unique country. We can make common cause with nations that we don't share all of our values with each other. But you know what we both share? We want a better life for our kids. And at times, FDR had to make common cause with Joseph Stalin to beat Hitler. So let's remember how precious this thing is and understand we are a unique country if we will simply call upon the unity of our country to represent what is the best about the human race. And that's sitting right here, right now, this morning. We take it for granted. I look around, yeah, this is an American audience. Actually, you see those 3 stars on the flag? What you're saying is East Tennessee, Middle Tennessee, West Tennessee are all together. Tracy taught me this, by the way. Thanks, Tracy. You remember in California when I asked about the 3 stars and you taught me?
I love it. I love it.
And so you got 3 stars that show 3 parts of Tennessee can work together. It's called the volunteer state. You're an example for what this country needs to have. A unity, a respect, and a love for each other that says, I can disagree 100% with you, and I still want to take you out for a beer. A root beer if you're Mormon. Okay, I got it, but we'll go out.
Yeah, okay, round of applause for that last story. Good. Let me just we'll touch on the high points of a few other places and keep throwing your stories in, obviously. The Russia, Ukraine, just again, we've got this image of 4 sort of mutually independent but dependent in terms of obstruction and direction for us. Just comment on Russia, the role, and Ukraine, where we are today.
Yeah, what we're seeing is a Russia led by a creature straight out of Dostoevsky, for those of you who read Russian literature. You read Dostoevsky and say, boy, that sounds familiar. I mean, Putin is a guy who goes to bed every night with nightmares of Russia being surrounded by enemies. And you know the real tragedy of all this that we're going through? There's one nation in the world that could really help the Russian people, and that's America. And it's never going to happen with him in charge over there. We're the one nation that's strong enough not to be afraid of them, far enough away that we can deal with them somewhat objectively, frankly. And it's never going to happen. And he is subordinating the Russian people into an economic colony, basically, of the Chinese. And he's going to continue to do it. 2008, he goes and invades Georgia, seizes 2 provinces, which he still holds today. In 2012, the European Union offers to bring Ukraine into the European Union because Ukraine knows it's got corruption problems, and by coming into the European Union, they will gain disciplines, oversight, audits that will help remove corruption. And so what does Putin do? 2014, he invades, seizes 2 provinces, still holds them, plus he seizes Crimea. And so he's not going to stop. And to give you an example of an objective review of this and what it is that we've got to be aware of and deal with and not deny, Sweden and Finland joined NATO, and throughout the Cold War, they never joined NATO. They wanted neutrality because they just wanted to keep their own sovereignty and stay out of it. Today, Sweden, which hasn't joined a military alliance since Napoleon's time, 200 years, These two nations reversed everything overnight after the second invasion here of Ukraine and joined NATO because they recognize neutrality in the face of Putin will no longer gain sovereignty. It could work against the USSR even, but not against Putin. He's that different. And so we're going to have to deal with Putin's Russia as it stands, not as we wish it were, because we can't wish away this threat. And the Ukrainian people have basically shown everybody that they don't want any foreign troops. They just want the weapons to defend themselves as they fight, again, that war that NATO never wanted to fight against the Russians. I think that you'll hear some people say, well, we kind of egged this thing on. We egged Putin on with the expansion of NATO. What is the one kind of nation in Europe, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Romania, which nations has he not invaded? NATO nations. Now you understand why these democracies have banded together, because they're vulnerable if left alone, like Georgia and Ukraine have proven. But we can also prove that Russia has never been worried about invasion from NATO, and we can prove it no matter what Putin says, and unfortunately, no matter what some members of the pro-Putin caucus in the U.S. House of Representatives say, that somehow he sensed this was a threat to him. I mean, the idea that Ukraine was an offensive threat to him is laughable, number one. Everyone knows they don't have the military to attack Russia back before and invade and march on Moscow. But what about NATO? If you look at all the defenses that Putin's army has put into the part of Ukraine they hold, you know, those, you can go on Google Earth and look at them, all the trench lines, pillboxes, barbed wire, minefields, all that. You'll notice along the NATO border, there's none of that. Now, if they had any worry whatsoever, don't you think they would have put some defenses along their own border? They knew NATO was no offensive threat, and that's provable. Furthermore, when I was a NATO Supreme Commander, on my NATO staff were Russian officers. Now, they were not there because we were so naive to think, well, they're going to be a big help to us. They're there so they could have actually internal presence inside my headquarters. When you went to the lunchroom, Russian officers are sitting at the next table or at your table if you're having lunch together that day. It's to prove to them we have no offensive designs. They know that we had no offensive designs. This is a completely cooked up piece of propaganda that they have never acted on themselves. Had nothing to do with reality. Even George Bush Sr., when the Berlin Wall came down, instructed the American troops, the American political establishment, don't dance in the end zone, don't rub their noses in it, let the Russian people come up again. And for a while, democracy was working. Imperfectly, and people like Putin ensured it was stillborn, basically. So we're going to have to deal with it. How do you deal with them? Allies, allies, allies. That's the way you do it.
We've got about 10 minutes. One of the things, and the General and I both have the opportunity to speak in audiences, and one thing I know you love and I love is to go to the audience. We don't really, obviously with 400 people, we can't do that. So I'm going to arbitrarily and pick somebody. Tom Beasley, I give you 3 minutes. I'll stall for you a little bit, but we need a question. And then that's going to represent, no, don't feel like any responsibility, but that's going to represent the question of everybody. And again, this time I'm surprising Tom with it, so I'll give you a few minutes. And then I want you to comment kind of why we're here. You have done so much from the military, the civilian side, the government side. You've written about it. You're speaking today, coming in. We're here to talk about support, assist, be available for veterans. Mm-hmm. How did the veterans play? You're in the middle of it. You know, you're a veteran now. How do you put veterans in terms of this perspective? And we're here to very much celebrate the Daniel Center and what it represents to individuals making transitions and supporting.
You know, I wasn't born with the views I have. You all paid my tuition for 40-some years to learn these things. And one point I would make is when veterans get together, we don't generally ask what rank you were. We're all co-equal, from private to general, from seaman recruit to admiral, in our commitment to this big experiment and protecting this Constitution, supporting and defending it. But when veterans get together too, it's a reminder to me that none of us were in the Army or the Navy or the Air Force or Coast Guard, Marine Corps. We were in the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy. We belong to you, accountable to you. And as such, you own us. We owe you an explanation for what we did. Did we represent your values? Did we live true to what this country stands for? Did we not let down the veterans who went before us in the Revolutionary War, in the Civil War, in the War of 1812, and on through World War I and II in Korea, and the Vietnam generation that raised me and many of the officers I served with, the NCOs I served with? It's a reminder that we belong to the American people, and the veterans belong to the American people. We're part of the body politic. We're part of the community. We're neighbors, and we don't need, extra something. What we need is a level playing field and maybe a hand as we join this new team coming out of the military. And I'll give you an example of, wouldn't you know it, a Tennessee veteran. A guy named, I actually wrote it down here because it's just important I get the name right because it's World War II. Master Sergeant Roddy Edwards from Tennessee. And he's in the Army Air Force and he gets shot down over Germany. That's not a fun thing to do. And he goes into a prisoner camp and they take all the officers away thinking, well, that leaves the enlisted troops with no leadership. Aha. You don't understand how the U.S. military runs. Our NCOs and petty officers are actually the hard spine of it. And out comes the German commandant of the POW camp, 1,292 POWs, and this young Tennessee lad is the senior one. He's only 23 years old, but they promote fast in World War II. And the commandant says, I want the Jews. All 200 of them. We know there's 200 Jews here. I want them in a separate formation tomorrow morning. He knows what's going to happen. They're going to be taken off and murdered. So the next day, 1,292 are all standing in formation. The German commandant comes out to the young master sergeant, says, I want the Jews. They can't all be Jews. He says, yep, we're all Jews. And he says, and by the way, you try killing us, you kill us, and my country's going to hunt you down at the end, and we're going to hang you. That's all there is to it. Furious, the guy puts a gun to his head and says, I want the Jews. He said, not going to do it. Wouldn't you know, a Tennessee NCO, if you want to see why all veterans consider themselves co-equal, when you think of who was down this stage, shot 13 times, we're all co-equal. We just have to make sure there's something like the Veterans Center that you also deliver as a model for the rest of the country. There to just give him a hand coming back, and you heard him say, hey, it's a little rough coming back from, he earned 13 Purple Hearts that day, he should be dead. And so just the idea that somehow veterans can come back to a place like this and be welcomed, well, I salute every one of you in this room.
And that's why we're here today, I think, and to thank all of you, and General Hoover, you especially. Tom, I need a 30-second question, and then I need a 1-minute answer. I want to get everybody.
I'll shorten it. I got it.
No. And then I want you to close because your stories are so good. You're going to have to think of a story to close with, and that'll be it. We'll be out in about 5 minutes. Tom?
I wasn't prepared for this, but let me say at the outset, you're the most interesting speaker I think I have ever heard.
Thank you.
I mean, you're so direct and so thorough in your analysis of everything you say about what's going on in the world. And this is not a political question. This is a question from a veteran. Given that if you were running the country and where you wanted to put the military would be, on a scale of 1 to 10, would be a 10 in preparation, where are we today?
Yeah, great question. I would say it's probably around a 7 or an 8. And two things, I'll just broaden slightly, Senator, and say we're going to have to increase the military budget. As General Colin Powell taught us young generals, show me your budget, I'll tell you what your strategy is. Don't tell me about your strategy and put your budget aside. The second point would be that we're going to have to do something to help our recruiters. You can't leave it to an Army sergeant to sell this. We need the commander-in-chief, the elected commander-in-chief. We need the senators. We need the mayors and governors. We need everyone out there helping and saying, Uncle Sam needs you, young lady, young man. We need to get people into that military, the all-volunteer force in the biggest crisis of 50 years. That answer your question, sir?
Yeah.
But they are ready to fight. Look at that Navy ship that deployed out of Norfolk. It's doing another boring day in the Red Sea. Goes to general quarters and start knocking missiles out of the air.
You just gave us two things that all of us can do on the recruiting side, and also talk to our elected representatives and everybody we talk to in the elections about the budget itself. And that's a real call to action. Are you optimistic, pessimistic where we're going? Close us down. We got a couple of minutes, and then we'll let everybody go. Tell us.
Real quickly, there's something that happened to me back in 2004, a hot summer in the western Iraq. I'm commanding basically about 15,000 sailors and Marines. I'm a 2-star, and I've got fewer troops to run this area than North Carolina, about the same size, has police officers. And I'm losing boys every day. Of my 29 sailors and Marines who move me around the battlefield, my drivers, gunners, aide, people like that, of those 29 sailors and Marines, 17 would be killed and wounded around me in 4 months, and I'm not in the bad fighting. I'm not in the infantry units. So I go out to check the screen line on the western border over near Syria. And the screen line is a bunch of outposts with young second lieutenants, probably 18 months out of undergraduate time, and about 40 sailors and Marines, and then about 10 kilometers away is another one of these little outposts. And if the enemy gets through from Syria, the foreign fighters, and they're very well trained, coming out of the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon and all, they're going to kill U.S. soldiers, and they're going to kill innocent Iraqis in Baghdad. So it's an important job. Again, we have to fight our way to get through there, and I get in about midnight one night inside this little perimeter of Marines living in holes. Another 120-degree day with 90% humidity in Iraq. And the lieutenant comes over and the sun comes up and he's briefing me and he says, by the way, here's where I'm taking casualties, here's how many enemy we've killed, here's how we're staying, normal stuff. He said, we caught a guy last night who was laying an IED on the road you came in on, pretty rudimentary, got his wheelbarrow, a couple artillery rounds, a car battery, and all. And he said he went 2 years for engineering school in London. He speaks English. You want to talk to him? I said, sure. So the lieutenant walks off after he'd done briefing me, and pretty soon, Marine walks over with a rifle muzzle on the back of a guy and motioned him to sit on the dirt next to me. And I'm looking at him. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I said, you're Sunni. We're the Marines. We're the only friends you got in this frickin' country. Why are you trying to kill us? He starts into one of those rants. Oh, you Jews, you Americans, you're here to steal the oil. I said, yeah, right. I pull my wallet out every time I pump gas. We're not here to steal your oil. We don't even want to be in your country. So go away. And the Marine reached down to grab him by the scruff of the neck. He's got his hands handcuffed. Pull him up, and the guy says, he's standing there, he says, can I just wait a minute? So I told the Marine to stand back, sat him back down. He said, I just don't like having foreign troops in my country. Man to man, look him in the eye. I wouldn't want foreign troops in my country. I respect that. I understand that. We talked some more, forced out of Baghdad by the civil war we'd unleashed with our invasion. And he and his wife and 2 daughters were renting a house out about 10 kilometers away on the Euphrates River. And so he asked me, am I going to jail? And I said, oh yeah, you're going to jail. You're going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit in Abu Ghraib. You're lucky you're not dead for this little stunt. And sun's getting up there. It's time for me to be moving on to see the next outpost. He said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I love my sailors and Marines, soldiers, airmen, allied troops, those unselfish people that go into harm's way for us, sign a blank check payable with their lives, every one of them. But he said something that reminded me that for all the source of strength, fundamental source of strength that our military is, our CIA, that we need, that they are, there's something even stronger, and that's America's power of inspiration. Because he said, do you think, General, if I'm a model prisoner, someday I can immigrate to America with my family? Now, ladies and gentlemen, there's problems in America, and I recognize this. And some days, if you watch a certain TV station, doesn't matter which one, it'll teach you to hate half of America, distrust each other and this sort of thing. But you just remember on your worst day, when this country, your beloved country, is driving you nuts, we're going to come back, and just think of that guy who would give anything to live in Nashville and his 2 daughters going to school right here. And just remember how blessed we are, and say, we're going to come together, we're going to come back together, and the enemies, don't get brave. Don't even think about it. We're going to defend this experiment. Thank you for having me here.
Join me in thanking General Mattis. Thank you, sir.
Pleasure.
Thank you again for being here. On your table is an envelope that if you feel moved, and I can't imagine any American here that's not moved, Huber needs more resources to help more people like Jay. So God bless America. I hope you feel in your heart to invest more in our veterans program. And thank you for coming. And thank you, General. You're dismissed.